It's March 2019 and delighted to welcome to the Cruising Yacht Club of Australia, Harold Cudmore. Harold, welcome. You've been a great visitor to Australia over many years, and you're one of the really colourful yachtsmen that we've known in our generation. So welcome. And your first memories of the CYCA, and when did you first come here?
Came here for the Half-Ton Cup in 1977 with a little 30-footer. And you know, that age and stage, you think you're king of the world with a 30-footer. You'd have to drag me onto one now.
Yes. And you did the Half-Ton Cup, the World Half-Ton Cup off Sydney?
Yes, I was the defending champion, and we came down, and we had, it was the era where we had the centreboard boats, and Bruce Farr was in his prime, really, with the smaller boats, or approaching his prime. So there was a group of Farr-designed boats, and I had a Ron Holland designed boat, and there was some local boats had been built, were just not competitive, so we had a bit of a ding-dong between the two different styles of design.
And how did you get on in the regatta?
Yeah, we were second. We dropped a rig at a critical race, and that does not help, believe me. Still got second.
Yeah, that's one of many rigs you've probably seen disappear over the side.
I think in double numbers.
Yes.
And the last one was 150 feet.
Yes.
So they got bigger over the years.
So that, if my memory serves me correctly, that regatta was held in December of that year, 77.
Yep.
And then you decided that you'd take this little boat to Hobart that year.
Well, we had a nice one. It was the first European entry as a European team. And in those days, there were 9 countries in the European Union. And so the decision was to have it. And we were, there was a French, I'm trying to remember now, it was a French, a German, and the Irish boat. So that was the first European team entry in any event, we think.
That was the Southern Cross Cup of that
Yes,
year,
Southern
1977
Cross Cup,
Southern
yeah.
Cross Cup. And the Hobart race was rather difficult and vigorous. Tell us about your Hobart race.
Yeah, that was first of all not a good idea, because our boat, it was super competitive, and we were pushing the rule. So one of the things we worked out is that if the boat didn't have a keel, it was really fast. So we had a floating centreboard. It was 10'6" deep, highly efficient shape.
How deep? 10'6".
10'6", because they hadn't restricted depth at that stage.
Wow.
So the thing was a wonderful, I mean, upwind was a witch. But of course, someone should have tapped on my shoulder and said, actually, it's not the boat to take to Hobart. And the famous navigator, Peter Bowker, came along as navigator with me. And I've never forgiven him. He should have had more sense.
Yes.
So we were a long way offshore when the weather kicked in. And coming back to Ulladulla, we did a bit of swimming. And then as we approached Ulladulla, Killian Bush, the famous boat builder who builds so many around the world boats, he, as he would, he checked the engine as we came into Ulladulla, and he looked for the dipstick because it was missing, and he checked the oil, which is good, and he noticed that there was oil on the underside of the cockpit from the engine. So I was very happy to see Ulladulla that year.
I'm sure. But these days, I mean, those boats, you look at them and you said you wouldn't go to Manly in them, really. But
well, I was one of the people that, following the Quarter-Ton Cup in Japan, where there was nearly very close to the loss of life. People were in the water for up to 18 hours. I was one of the people that rushed back and said to the rule makers, got to change this. You see, the problem is the Australians were more macho in those days. It was before the gay carnival, of course. And the Japanese are macho anyway.
yeah.
And no one would put their hand up and say, this was crazy. I went back and said, this is crazy. We've got to change the rules. And the CYCA were very good. They stopped some of those boats going to Hobart, which is good. And they were getting on the case. But remember, the rules in those days were very clear. It's the responsibility of the skipper to take the boat to sea, not the club. Things have moved on, and there's a sense of liability. The club shares that liability. So that has impinged. And there are big questions still over this matter to this very day. And at a different level, of course, people go off around the world single-handed. So it's a fine balance, and I'd say the CYCA is at the forefront of thinking about these things and acting on it.
So that was your first visit to Australia, and how did it end? It ended in Western Australia, I think, didn't it, in Albany?
Did the Fremantle-Albany race, you know, which was wonderful fun. I'm young, fit and silly, and so we're having a great time.
Nothing's changed, it's just got old.
Yeah, old, less fit and still silly. And we had this, I had this message, and I still don't know how communication worked in those days, but it seemed to work. Would I care to go to Rio? And well, first of all, the answer is yes, but why? So I trundled off from Albany to Rio to sail the last leg of the second ever Whitbread, now Volvo race, on again, the first ever European direct entry, and the sail number was EUR1. Oh. And Treaty of Rome, which was what drew the 9 countries in Europe together. A very interesting trip because, of course, they were each from 9 different nationalities. So there was no base country we were operating from. And we had wonderful discussions on board. You say, well, how do you do this in your country? How do you do that? And one stage, how do you meet a girl in your country? And the Danish chap told us in 2 minutes, and the Italian took the rest of the day.
But she was an old Pinter, I think, wasn't it?
She was, yes. Yes. Yeah. Sponsored by the owner.
Yeah. So then I think you probably had a lovely feeling about Australia and Sydney, and you kept coming back, didn't you?
Well, there was in 2 steps. First of all, we came back for Southern Cross Cup, and I won it on a couple of 3 occasions. I can't quite remember. Memory fades. I'd have to check records. What's your name again? And I won with both the British and Irish teams, and I think we won class on a couple of occasions. I remember one trip with Chris Dunning and Peter Kurtz on board, and then eventually with an old Peter Kurtz boat owned by John Story called Atara, we won the Terrasil Cup in '91. So it was nice to win both the overall trophy and the Southern Cross on several occasions.
And what are your memories of the Hobart race? I mean, you've raced around the world, and Fastnet obviously, and various races throughout Europe. What's your memory and feeling of the Sydney-Hobart race?
I think the reason great classic races survive is they have their own character and personality. The Faster race has its personality. The Sydney-Hobart race has its personality. And races that don't develop that don't survive. So there have been various races over the years. And it will be a classic because, first of all, you sail from good weather to less good weather. That's never a good idea. So people used to always say, why don't you go on the Coffs Harbour race? Then you have, of course, the big currents off the coast. You have the famous southerly busters. And then you have the drama of the point at Hobart where you turn into Storm Bay.
Tasman Island, yeah.
And then you turn up the river. And then when you get to Hobart, you have a very wonderful welcome. So it has great character, and it can be a very difficult race, as we know. So I think that's what makes it so attractive. Yeah.
And do you see like the Fastnet race this coming year is oversubscribed? I mean, they've got 350 boats entered already. It's extraordinary how popular that's become again, hasn't it, the Fastnet race?
And they're restricted, and the entries are completed in 20 minutes. So just to give you an idea, there's a queue. So what they've done is they've levered the entry restriction with a requirement that they sail 2 RORC races or qualify in a particular way, but mostly. So it's encouraged the season to become very busy again. So there are 2 elements to this. First of all, a classic race, and secondly, two-handed racing has evolved quite a bit in our waters at home, in the Channel, English channels where we sail. And one of the reasons is, of course, the difficulty of putting together a crew and the cost and everything else. So that and the fact that Fast was won by a two-handed crew a couple of years ago. So it means that we've had a revival of ocean racing at that size of boat, perhaps middle 30 feet. Now, I wouldn't encourage that particularly for Sydney-Hobart, and because of distance and everything else, people will bring bigger boats. So I think Sydney-Hobart will survive as a premier event and probably develop as. But the boats have to get here, so that I guess the club has to work on that.
You're at the cutting edge, I guess, is through the 70s and 80s when the Admirals Cup out of Cowes was at its height. Almost 23 boat teams, world-class sailors, world-class yachts. That must have been a highlight to race in that regatta amongst great quality boats and people.
That was very special. And of course, remember, of those boats, there were lots of boats that were fighting to get into teams. So in various countries there were like 10, 15 boats being built to get in the 3-boat team.
Well, Australia as well. I mean, we used to build a lot of boats, 15
America,
boats,
as well, and so on.
Yeah.
So I think the Admirals Cup declined. There were various reasons, but one of the ones, I'm afraid, was that 85 summer. Oh my God, it was bad. That's where we developed modern sailing clothing. The weather was so terrible.
Windy the whole series, wasn't it? Yeah.
And what happened is at the end of that, the warm weather countries said, this is mad. So we haven't had an entry from Japan, Spain, all these warm weather, Italy. This is madness.
Yeah.
And you can see where the great tradition of the Royal Navy came from. If you can survive that, you can rule the world.
Yeah.
Well, hang on a moment. We're not quite in that agenda.
Yes. I'll take you back to the '93 Admirals Cup, and I think you were racing for Ireland, and the team was sponsored by Jameson Whiskey.
Yes.
And
they did awfully well with some of the promotion we did.
You did very well. I mean, they should have given you Jameson Whiskey for life, because in the first inshore race, I think you went and tried to go inside Gurnard Ledge.
No, we knocked an edge of it, okay, and the keel fell off, which actually was a bit of a scandal.
And the morning newspaper the next day, the Daily Telegraph, the Daily Mail in England, Jameson on the rocks. And there was Jameson Whiskey, this one-tonner with about a foot of freeboard, and you standing quite like an admiral on the stern.
a great tradition, yes.
Yes.
And of course, the other headline, which you mightn't appreciate, was actually the boat was owned by King Harold of Norway.
Norway, that's right. Yes.
So Harold sings Harold's yacht, you know.
Yes.
So it was certainly quite high profile.
Yeah.
But he was very understanding.
Yeah.
I mean, I
well,
think,
Harold, just taking you to today, how do you see ocean racing today? The boats that have been developed, and you know, you've seen it all happen. Where do you see it at the moment, ocean racing?
I think, like so many sports, there's a division between the more serious professional sailing, and you have to respect the French. I think they're at the forefront of it, and I think it's their game now, and you've got to really, if you want to get into the game, you've got to learn French. The one exception is the Volvo race, which is still Anglophile race broadly. And so I see that that's become very specialist, and people that race in those races, like the race, the Admirals Cup, and certain other key events, they're full-time, they're very, very good. And some of the top French sailors offshore are unbelievably good. And then the sort of traditional offshore racing based in clubs, I think is in a difficult position. That type of sailing, I think, worldwide is shrinking, and it's going to take quite a bit of effort and thought to keep it going and keep it successful. And perhaps short-handed racing is perhaps one of the ways that this will evolve. And time will tell on that. What's happening more and more, because of time constraints, opportunities for people can do so many things. A lot of people are chartering boats. And I've said to people very often at home, they say, I love sailing, what should I do? And I often say, own the smallest boat you're happiest with, close to where you live, and charter the largest boat you can afford for your holidays. So people might have, for instance, a day boat in Etchell, a Dragon or something, a little boat, and then they will go and charter in the Med, Caribbean, anywhere around the world, nowadays further. So it's a big issue, and I think, again, CYCA is very aware of that, because they represent really the offshore element of Yachting Australia. The same way in the UK, the Royal Ocean Racing Club represents Royal Yachting Association, the offshore interests. So.
Foiling? How do you see the future of foiling for offshore boats?
I think for a very, very professional crew. There was a cruising foiler they had in the Caribbean there a couple of years ago. I went for a sail on it, and she famously capsized in St. Bart's when she'd been produced, first of all. And the cruising in inverted commas. As we got on foils, I noticed that none of the sheets were cleated, and the sheet hand was an Olympic sailor.
Yes. Yeah.
Enough said.
Yes, indeed. So you come annually now to Australia and spend the Australian summer here from your home in Cowes. Over the years, you must have some great memories of this yacht club, the CYC, and the characters around it.
Yeah, that's what happened. We did all that sailing and then sort of stopped because I got involved in the Admirals Cup, other parts of my life. And then my wife had a great Australian connection. She's an Australian passport and had lots of Australian friends. And so we said, we haven't been here for a while. So I had the bright idea that we should put our kids in school here for a term a year. So we started coming here, doing that, and then reconnecting here, but not offshore sailing. Just doing silly things like historic skiffs and day sailing and so on. But some of the people are still here. Tony Cable, I'm not sure it's a robot you operate mechanically or he's a real person. He's sitting in the corner of the CYCA still. It was great to see him.
Yeah, I mean, he's one of the great characters of this club. But, you know, the last 12 months, this club has gone under massive renovations over the bar and the upstairs facility. It's a pretty world-class facility now, isn't it?
I think Matty Allen's been a great driving force here for Australian yachting generally. I think he was a driver here. I sailed with him one day on Ichiban, and he's the sort of guy that is very much aware and on side and promoting it.
So what's coming up for you, Harold? You got any sailing in order for the coming 12 months or so?
You know, I go home now next week for 2 days, as you do. Then a quick 3-day party in Ireland, home for another 3 days, and then go to the Caribbean. So we go cruising and I guess do the oyster regatta on a 86-footer that carries a chef as well. So things aren't entirely hard for me. So. And
Fastnet this year? You're doing Fastnet?
No, I haven't done that for a while. Right. As I said to people, I don't earn a place on a race boat, and I'm not that interested in other boats. But having said that, the last Fastnet I did was on a Swan 65, which was thoroughly enjoyable. And I love the house rules. You know, we had sleep in all the berths. Okay, have a shower every evening because, you know, hygiene rules, wine with dinner, and a rather unusual one for the young crews, smoking below. We finished with our DJs on.
You did a jacket on. Lovely, lovely. Well, we'll end on that note. But Harold, look, you're always welcome in Australia. It's wonderful to see you. You've been one of the great characters of yachting worldwide. So continue to do well and continue to come to Australia. You're always welcome at the CYC.
Thank you. It's Peter, isn't it?
That's right.
Well done, Peter. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Harold.